Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And this is video 2 of a 3-part series I'm doing, making nurgle knights for my nurgle and death guard army. So this is the middle of the 3 knights, more mutated. You can see here he's got a demonic right leg, a demonic kind of left arm, and covered in pustules, boils, cracked armour, and that type of thing you can see on the model here. So as I said, this is video 2. Video 1 was a fairly plain and simple knight, just with some basic nurgle parts. This one's the second stage, more mutated, more demonic, and the third video will be coming out after this will be the full-on demonic knight conversion. So stick around if you want to see what I did with this one, and obviously I'll put links down below for video 1 so you can check that out. So in this video we're taking lots of parts from the Chaos Knight kit, and also we're going to use some of the parts from the glottkin model to sort of push through that demonic change. If you watch video 1, you'll know that we used pretty much the entirety of just the knight kit with a couple of little cast up parts from the glottkin. So hopefully you'll see as we progress through this series of 3 videos more and more demonic parts and just interesting pieces being used. So we start off obviously as just build the model as per normal. I do have a plan for what I wanted to do with the build. The reason I'd selected the knight models and the glottkin model is I could see some kind of synergy between them in terms of sizes, leg poses, that type of thing. But I tend to start these builds by building component parts. So I'm building the leg here in super speed. Wouldn't it be great if we could build at this speed all the time? So I'm building the little parts, keeping armour panels off and not fully assembling everything until really I've decided kind of where we're going. That's typically how I approach a build. I will have a plan, I will have a broad idea what I'm going to do, but really until you get to the nitty-gritty of having the pieces in your hand, you never know if it's quite going to fit or not. So doing the build, and then we'll show you later kind of what we do. Now in the first video you'll remember, if you've watched it, that we cast up some parts with blue stuff, we cast up some armour panel parts and that kind of thing, and then we filled that with green stuff. Now I've not used them yet, you'll see that in video 3. But before I start assembling the torso of this knight, I'm just casting up some of the top parts of the carapace with some blue stuff that I've melted back down from the moulds that I've already used from video 1. We're also casting up the shoulder pad, as you can see here, and then you'll see these again when we come to video 3. So the reason I've tried to do this in a 3-part series is to hope that if you guys watch it and you enjoy what I'm doing, you can sort of see the stages through these 3 knight builds and how actually the kits that I've bought to do this with really interconnect, and you can't really do knight 3 before you do knight 1 and kind of vice versa. So hopefully you'll see that as a bit of synergy through the series and just give you some little bits of inspiration. So I won't go through really how to make a blue stuff mould. I do have a video on that. I love using blue stuff to cast parts up, so I'll link that video down below if you want to check that out about really exactly how to make those moulds. Now in terms of filling the moulds, what I'm filling it with here is a 50-50 mix of green stuff and milliput. Now I cast up using quite a lot of different things, but with blue stuff I'll use milliput, I'll use green stuff. Now green stuff is more flexible, milliput's more rigid. I wanted a balance between the two for this part that I'm casting. So this is a milliput and green stuff mix, in case you're wondering why it looks a bit funny. But as I said before, you won't see that part again until video 3. Now we've built all the major parts of the knight. You can see there on the table. What we're doing now is the leg section from the glottkin. So I've chosen the right leg because of the angle of the knight leg, the way that the metallic parts are posed, it seems to fit in really nicely with the glottkin's right leg. Now, a thing to bear in mind if you do this yourself, the glottkin and the knight, they are slightly different sizes. So the glottkin is a fair bit shorter, but actually some of the component parts like the legs and things are sized relatively well. But bear in mind, they're not sort of identical, so you will end up with a little bit of a funny looking creature. But the kind of point of that is that's what's going to happen, I suppose, with that demonically possessed knight. And what I was going for here with this build is really to have the idea that the pilot of this knight has been demonically possessed, and that kind of nurgle-esque stuff is coming out from that. So I'm gluing the left leg on, which is fine. We're not gluing anything with the right leg, but I wanted it so that I could gauge the size and the height from the demonic leg that we're going to use. So glued the middle of that torso on, the ball joint, and then really started comparing how we're going to make the leg work. Now knight legs are articulated very differently to the demon legs, which is fine, because like on the end model, well yes, the articulation on the right leg and the left leg isn't going to be the same, because we're going to try and articulate the right leg more how the demon was. but that's kind of the fun of nurgle and daemonic, and look, and 40k in general really. None of it follows actual physics, but we're lining it up, and actually I think it'll work relatively well. But you're not going to be able to get that double jointed articulation you see here. So I did have quite a bit of a ponder about how I was going to approach this, what I was going to do. Did I feed in the double jointedness into the knight, and then decided against that and thought, no, do you know what, it's this first top panel, hopefully you can see me faffing around here, and decided that's how we're going to approach it and use that top panel. Now I started off by removing the cables on the back here, because I thought, well, we're definitely not going to need that as we're feeding it in. And then I did at this point contemplate just snippering off the top half of this leg, and then I figured, well, then I could use the bottom half when I come to night number 3. Now the thing is, obviously I hadn't pre-planned what I'm doing for night number 3, so at this point I thought, no, am I sacrificing too much of a model? So you'll see in a second what I went back to and my solution was for finishing that leg. Now just quickly on to building the glottkin left whip arm, because it's a beautiful piece. Now I know technically what it will end up is we won't have a, I suppose, game legal model, because this arm is going to represent the chainsaw type thing that they use on the knights, but to be fair, the guys I play with will be absolutely fine with me using it as that, and obviously it counts as, and it's rule of cool, isn't it? Let's be honest, when we're doing these things, some of the joy of doing conversions is maybe doing some of the stuff that you wouldn't technically be able to do. Right, now back onto this leg. So you see there, that's the mould that I used to cast up the shoulder pad. I've cast it, I've made one. I can reuse that blue stuff, so I'm melting that down to then deal with what we're going to do with this leg. So I didn't want to cut the leg and sacrifice it, and it probably would have been fine, and I could have done something different in the third night build, but I wasn't sure if I could sacrifice this leg or whether I was going to need the whole thing, because obviously this is going to be the final leg in the third build, because the glottkin model has no leg now. So quickly casting up the top part of this leg, just to be safe and sure that, you know, I could be able to use it and it's not going to ruin the future conversion by having no leg, you know, to stick in. So we filled that mould with milliput, and now with some of the excess milliput that we've got, I'm going to make a few very small kind of balls of milliput. Now I'm going to use these later in the build, as you'll see. It's something I do with any excess, whether I've got excess green stuff, excess milliput, I'll make things for future projects with it rather than wasting it. I have got a bag of little milliput balls knocking around somewhere, and they're great for nurgle, for putting into bases to look like bubbles, that kind of thing. So a very, very useful thing to be doing, and obviously we don't want to encourage waste. So there's now plenty of time to dry. I think this is the following day. We're working on the leg, and it's come out quite nicely. The reason I've cast it in milliput, in case you're asking, because I do use milliput and green stuff, as I've mentioned before. Milliput's a bit more rigid, so if you were to do this out of green stuff, there would be flex in there. Also, green stuff's more expensive, so this is a slightly cheaper way of doing it, but I wanted it quite rigid because it's going to be obviously a support structure for the leg, and the weight of the knight is going to be on it. Now if you've cast it up properly, you'll see it fits nicely in. This is before cleaning up, fits nicely into that socket, so we can glue that on fairly shortly. Now before we get into the assembly of the legs and stuff, I wanted to go around all the armour panels and make sure I'd done the same process I did on night 1. Now I won't go through exactly how I damaged and roughed up the armour panels and what exactly I did, because I talked about this quite a bit in night 1's build, but really I just wanted to personalise the armour. You don't have to do this side because, you know, there's enough damage on these things as is, and you, with some of the paint schemes, are going to do it, but I just think it adds that little bit of individuality. And if you do end up doing a duplicate build, the armour damaging stage is always going to be different, so that's what adds that individuality to your models. So just be careful when you're doing it. Do as much or as little as you want, and again, reference that first video and it will show you a little bit more on the damage and things I did, kind of, and concept why. So we've done all the panels. The right leg strut is now dried onto the model, so giving time for the super glue to dry, and that's something to think of when you're doing these things. Let stages dry in between. Now we're digging out the, what I think is a hobby essential bit of blue tack, and sticking the knight's foot down, really, so I've got time to be moving around the right leg piece and get the space in. So it's like an extra pair of hands just sticking this thing down with a bit of blue tack. So now really we're test fitting and watching it at super speed again. It's a glorious thing about getting this leg to look right. So I've removed a little bit of the plastic from around the top of the glottkin leg, and I have kept that because obviously we can use that when we build the glottkin. And now it's about really getting this leg to look right. Now what I do is I use milliput as a filler. So just pushing it in, put a bit of super glue in there as well, and use that to stick this leg in place. So I'm happy with where it is, so you can take the blue tack away and it will balance and prop. And then really just carve off bits of milliput that you're not happy with. Use a wet scalpel or a wettened sculpting tool to really just start to merge that daemonic leg in with the metallic parts. And really play and see what you think is fine. The beauty, I've said it before, of converting nurgle is you can be a bit messier than you would ordinarily be if you were converting, you know, a space marine or a guardsman or whatever. You've got that kind of reason to be mucky because it's nurgle and it's a great army to decide. So now we're fast forwarding again to the following day. You really do need to just leave the milliput stuff to dry right overnight or for a few hours. You know, if you do this in the morning, you can come back to it at night because you want that strength in there before you start putting the next pieces on. Now, and I'm just assembling the knight now as perfectly normal, putting on the armour panels, putting the torsos on, etc. Now, a lot of times when you build knights and big models, you might want to build it in separate pieces because it's easier to store. Or you can magnetize the waist or whatever, but I'm building these complete because again, because I'm doing several knights, it's not like I want the different options to be available to me. I just want to build them as I built them, but you could at this point if you wanted build them separate. Now I'm just putting all the pieces, and I decided against putting the leg strut on. I could have done it, would have fit in absolutely fine, but I decided against a couple of pieces. But basically I'm building this as perfectly normal, but I'm not putting the leg armour on the right thigh that we've made out of milliput because I want that to really stand out, that that's just like a mutated and going through the change kind of leg strut. So yeah, normal build at this point, and I will work on to the right arm. So we've got that tentacle arm, as you call it, off the glottkin. I have removed an inch or so from the end where that's where it merges into the glottkin body, and we've kept that piece for later on. So I'm not throwing away that offcut because when we build the glottkin model later we might need that. So just test fit it, make sure you're comfortable with where it's going, and I wanted it to stand out maybe an inch or so more from the body than where I've cut it. So I'm just taking a couple of lengths of sprue and making a couple of struts to come out of this arm that will connect to the body, and I've angled them so that they will slot into where the hooks are, where the weapon would normally go. So the bottom strut goes in underneath that hook, top strut goes in the top one, and that should give it a bit more strength, and we can glue in there to really solidify it. So I've glued in there, and then we've put milliput into the space between the struts and touching the body of the knight. So when this dries, this will really solidify this onto the model, give a particular bit of strength. We have glued also the tentacle arm to the underneath of the shoulder pad, so should be plenty of strength to hold this on, and you know, barring dropping it off a gaming table, I suppose, onto a concrete floor, this thing shouldn't break. I've knocked it over multiple times during the painting process, and it's stayed rigid, no danger of anything coming off, so it is a fairly solid construct the way we've done it, so definitely recommend doing that. Now again, back to milliput, seems to be my favourite thing in this build, and we're going to make the knight now look a bit more mutated, so just make a little sausage of milliput. We're dropping that down into a gap there, and then we're running it so it looks like a mutated nurgle tentacle coming up and gradually taking over the model. Two purposes for this: one, makes it look cool and nurgly, and two, we can run that milliput from the core of the model down the arm, and when that sets, that will seal on and give it a little bit of extra strength. I don't necessarily think it needs it, but you know, it looks cool, and why not have a bit of extra strength? And then at the base of the tentacle, drop a little bit of milliput in there and just kind of squish it around, and it will make that tentacle look like it's merging out the body. So multiple purposes being served there. And if you wanted to do a knight and you didn't want to say buy multiple kits, this is how you could make the knight look more mutated than the first knight we did. So we didn't do any kind of tentacles and things like that on the first knight because I wanted it to look recently turned. This one's very demonic. If you didn't want to buy though a glottkin kit, you could just use the milliput like that and it would be great. So this is something we did on video 1. These are the little cast up nurgle parts you saw with the pustules and things. I won't go through exactly how we made them this time, but check out video 1. So now we're just doing that detail work across the knight, exactly like we did in the first vid. So again, check that out. We're now just putting nurgle details onto all those panels that haven't had that detailing already, just to really bring it up to match the first knight, but really give that extra nurgle effect, because a lot of these panels are just as the normal chaos knight would be. So really nice little things to do. Again, put as much or as little of these as you want across the model, and then blend them in. Now back to those little balls of milliput we made. So here are the sockets where the actual build wants you to put the spikes coming out of them. Now I don't think the spikes look very nurgly, so we're replacing these with little balls of milliput so it looks like there's a pustule bursting out of the armour panel. And again, we'll come back to that and you'll see that in the painting stage. Liquid green stuff time. Great stuff this. There are options and other things you could use. You can melt down plastic sprues, that kind of thing, but as a simple and quick thing, you can just open the pot and crack on. Liquid green stuff from workshops, very useful, and we're using this again to blend in the areas where we've put the green stuff castings on and then a little bit onto the plastic panel. And that should hopefully take away that little bit of a ridge. And so here we are before we throw any paint on. We've done the cast up parts we've got on there, we've got the glottkin parts on, we've done the green stuff pustule sections, and we've done the liquid green stuff to sort of blend it in. So you can see where we're at in terms of this build. Quite a lot of alterations on there, quite a few pieces that's different. Now I won't talk you through every single part of the painting stage because this is identical to what we did on night number 1, so check that video out. But just want to take you through, really stage 1 is to use the technical paint, which is the Games Workshop Agrellan Earth, and then work through the painting processes. So lovely stuff this for doing cracked armour and damage, and what you're going for again is enough gross bits, I suppose you'd call it, to make it look very nurgle, but try and leave some of the model showing through from the original panels. So I won't talk you through the painting scheme, I'll just have it running in the background while I talk, because again it's identical to what we did on night number 1. So again, just tell you a little bit about why I'm doing this project. I have mentioned it before, but in case this is the first video you've watched with me talking about nurgle, over the coming probably 9 months I'll be doing a big expansion to my Death Guard army, taking the army to about 10,000 points for a big game we're doing in summer, because a friend of mine's bought a Warlord Titan. So this is going to be quite a lot of what the channel is going to cover over the next few months. I will jump out into a bit of Necromunda, a bit of bolt action, a bit of other systems, but primarily, you know, the channel's focus, probably 50% of the time, is going to be expanding this Nurgle army. So if you want to, you know, see what I do with that, you know, keep an eye on the channel, and you'll see some crazy nurgle stuff coming along. So yeah, forgive me if that becomes the overwhelming channel focus, but that tends to be how I do my gaming and my armies. You know, if I've got a big event coming up, we'll do that. I do have another event coming up in Feb where we're going to do just a 1,000-point mini tournament. I'm doing my Marines, so I'll skip out of nurgle for a while. There's an interesting part. So I realised right the way through the paint scheme, and I saw a horrible mould line down this panel, as you can see, that I'd obviously missed in the clean-up part. You see the left-hand side, I've cleaned it up beautifully. I'd completely missed the mould line down this entire seam, don't know why. Now I could have left it, but it would have bugged me forever, so I literally scraped the mould lines off, scraped through the 2 layers of paint that were on there as is, got rid of the mould lines and just painted over with that bit of silver. And yeah, was it frustrating having to do that and repaint? Yes, it was, but I think less frustrating than seeing those mould lines forevermore on this night. So a lot of mistakes get made. Whenever you make a mistake in modelling and hobbying, you can cover it over, you can fix it, or you could just leave it. It doesn't really matter, it's your model, you can do what you like. But for me, something glaring like that, it would have always stood out. So I thought it was worth the time just to, you know, scrape that line off and carry on. So here we go, back on the painting side again. You can see I've done a nice dirty ink wash layer. And really my kind of painting with the knights was to make them match as close as possible to what I've done for my Death Guard already. You know, there are times to experiment and do different paint schemes and different things, but for me, I want the entire army to kind of blend. So that's why I'm not really showing you anything different with this paint scheme than you've already seen on the knights, and fairly similar to obviously what I've done for prior nurgle. So we want the whole thing to blend together, because although these aren't Death Guard in the rules, because they're not, they don't get the Death Guard rules, I wanted them to really to reflect the Death Guard army and really be a part of that. So the whole army will really theme around the colour scheme of my actual Death Guard. So here we go. Now I'm going to touch very briefly back onto the painting once we've got through the yellow pustule parts on here, because although this paint scheme is the same as what we've done previously, there's one stage of difference which we'll talk about on the leg. Now, so obviously this leg is a much bigger part of flesh and kind of demonic bits than I've been on before. So we've had some demonic flesh areas on the previous model, but very, very small areas. Now with the larger area, I wanted it to be slightly different to the small bits we've done before. So what I'm taking here is Games Workshop's Biel Tan Green shade, and I'm putting it on to all the demonic flesh areas, or the big demonic flesh area on the leg and the arm, but watering it down. So I'm not putting this on neat, I'm putting a tiny bit on, spreading it over a massive area just to give a hint of like a green tinge to the thing. So I'm not doing it as a proper wash because then it would really green it up and I don't want it too much, but there just wants to be a green tinge on the leg. I didn't do this on the small flesh areas because again, I found the effect we've done there absolutely fine, but I just wanted that leg to just be that little bit different to the initial demonic stages. And then we're back onto the normal colour scheme that you've already seen, do it with the purple. So there's the completed model. I think it really matches in nicely. One thing to point out, actually, the symbol on the tilting shield is exactly the same, but I think a really nice effect. I'm really loving what these knights are doing so far. Definitely looking forward to getting the third one done and having these boys used in a game together. So hopefully you've taken some good ideas from this. If you did enjoy it, this is the typical YouTube part where we say like, comment, subscribe, comment down below, that kind of thing, and check me out on Instagram and Facebook. It's Adam's Hobby Stuff. Hope you enjoyed all that. Check the links down below for everything I've done and used and the equipment I do, and I'll see you next time.